Assuming a minimal mutual willingness to be in contact and to receive communications, we may say that the greater the communicated congruence of experience, awareness, and behavior on the part of one individual, the more the ensuing relationship will involve a tendency toward reciprocal communication with the same qualities, mutually accurate understanding of the communications, improved psychological adjustment and functioning in both parties, and mutual satisfaction in the relationship. Pretty good hypothesis. So basically what he's saying is that if we're communicating, and I tell you what's actually going on with me the best I possibly can, and try to get rid of all the motives that have nothing to do with communication, then that's going to work out quite nicely in the long run. It's going to work out for both of us and for the relationship. It's like, it's good. It's an interesting hypothesis. I can tell you that people don't do this. You know, I showed you that Gottman, I don't know how many of you looked at that link, the Gottman studies on marital satisfaction, right? But I thought that was really interesting because I've seen people like that lots of times. You know, they're on the surface, everything's fine, but, well, sometimes the tension is so high you can hardly even stand to be in the room with the people, you know, because you can just, at an embodied level, you're mirroring the distress. You know, you get a pit in your stomach, it's hard to breathe, and you just know. It's probably smell, I think, is what it's communicated by. You know, smell affects us in all sorts of ways we don't understand. So here's an example. Women like the smell of t-shirts that men wore if the men are symmetrical better than if the men aren't symmetrical. So that's a good example of how smell affects you. It affects you in lots of ways. So anyways, what Gottman observed was that basically the couples that weren't getting along were just lying to each other all the time, right? Because they were pretending that everything was all right, when in fact nothing was all right at all. Their bodies were going haywire. That's a technical term, haywire. So it was way too stressful for them, and you might say, well, why is that bad? Why shouldn't you be like that? Because that's a good question. Well, one is, if your stress responses are too elevated, we know what happens. That's the generalized stress response. Your cortisol levels go up, and then, well, then you age fast. So if you want to age fast, that's a very good way of doing it. But if that's not your goal, you know, your goal is peace and harmony, then pretending that everything's all right without communicating isn't going to work. And so the couples aren't saying things like, there's something about the way we're talking that's making me extremely nervous. And then actually trying to figure that out. It's like, I wouldn't say, well, you're making me nervous, because, well, maybe you are, but maybe not. Maybe I'm just the nervous type. God only knows. Let's see if we can sort this out. Or maybe I'm nervous about something else completely. You know, maybe I'm nervous about women. So there's lots of digging to do. Okay, so you can think about that. You can think, well, is that a reasonable proposition? Now, you can try this. This is an excellent, I'm not going to tell you many specific psychological exercises, but this is a really good one. It's hard too. Real communication occurs and the evaluative tendency avoided when we listen with understanding. So the evaluative, Rogers' theory is difficult to understand with regards to the relationship between evaluation and unconditional positive regard, because he tends to speak as if evaluation is bad. But really what he means is hierarchical evaluation, which is, you're worse than me, or I'm better than you. It's like, those things might even be true in any given case, but they're not relevant to what we're doing. Right? We're trying to do something other than that. So when that creeps in, I think of that as dominance hierarchy maneuvering. And that happens all the time when people are talking, you know. They're just maneuvering around in a dominance hierarchy. They're not trying to communicate. So that's the evaluative tendency. What does this mean? It means to see the expressed idea and attitude from the other person's point of view, to sense how it feels to him, to achieve his frame of reference in regard to the thing he is talking about. Stated so briefly, this may sound absurdly simple, but it is not. It's an approach which we have found extremely potent in the field of psychotherapy. It's the most effective agent we know for altering the basic personality structure of an individual and improving his relationships and his communications with others. That's quite the statement, you know. The most effective agent we know for altering the basic personality structure of an individual. If I can listen to what he tells me, if I can understand how it seems to him, if I can see its personal meaning for him, if I can sense the emotional flavor which it has for him, then I will be releasing potent forces of change in him. If I can really understand how he hates his father or the university or communists, if I can catch the flavor of his fear of insanity or his fear of atom bombs or of Russia, it will be of the greatest help to him in altering those very hatreds and fears and in establishing realistic and harmonious relationships with the very people and situations towards which he has felt hatred and fear. We know from our research, by the way, Rogers was one of the first clinicians who empirically evaluated the outcome of psychotherapy. And so he actually more or less established the idea that therapy outcomes should be measured scientifically. And in doing that, in some sense, he set down one element of the standards by which modern clinical psychologists are actually trained and practiced, because the modern clinical psychologist is a scientist practitioner. So the idea is that you should be trained as a researcher and as a practitioner, and that's quite unique. Doctors, medical doctors, for example, are not trained that way, although you could make a very strong case that they should be. We know from our research that such empathic understanding with a person, not about him, is such an effective approach that it can bring about major changes in personality. Now, some of you may be feeling that you listen well to people and that you've never seen such results. The chances are very great indeed that your listening has not been of the type I have described. Fortunately, I can suggest a little laboratory experiment which you can try to test the quality of your understanding. The next time you get into an argument with your wife, or your friend, or with a small group of friends, just stop the discussion for a moment, and for an experiment, institute this rule. Each person can only speak up for himself once he has first restated the ideas and feelings of the previous speaker accurately, and to that speaker's satisfaction. Now that's the annoying part, right? Because if you're in an argument, you're going to use all sorts of rhetorical devices in order to win. And one of the most obvious of those rhetorical devices is that you make your case, and I only half listen because I'm formulating what I'm going to say to you next, and then I impose a bias in my processing of your argument, and so that what I address when I talk to you is the sort of argument that you'd make if you were weak and stupid and contemptible. And then I go after that, and that's basically a straw man approach, right? I take your position, and I try to make it into the scrawniest little rattiest thing I can possibly manage, illustrating that it needs to be rubbed out, and then I rub it out. It's like the Rogerian approach is actually exactly the opposite.